Hello and welcome to Destination Draft Day. We got some great coverage coming to you today, joined by Nick Durst and Brian Sosa. I am Michael Rockman. We are back and ready. It is a wonderful Friday. Maybe a cold one for a lot of people out there. I know it's cold for all of us for sure. Brian, Nick, how are you guys doing today?
I am sore from doing a lot of shoveling, and I'm also, I guess, happy that Carson Wentz is no longer in the NFC East because I think that I like the Giants' chances against Nick Foles and Jalen Hurts.
Brian, how about you?
I'm doing great. I don't have to shovel, luckily, thanks to just the situation I have where I live here, but definitely not going anywhere, so I'd rather be in a warm place right now, but it's all right. I'm here with you guys. Great way to end the week, as always.
Absolutely. And as Nick touched on, let's jump right into it. Carson Wentz has officially been traded to the Indianapolis Colts, a third-round pick this year, a second-round pick next year that most likely turns into a first, assuming he stays healthy. For me personally, I really like this trade for the Colts. I think Frank Reich doesn't get enough credit for how well Phillip Rivers played compared to what we saw for the end of his Los Angeles Chargers tenure. I want to get your guys' thoughts, though, hear what you think about this trade and what it does for both teams.
Well, I mean, look, do you remember when Reich was the coach for Wentz? Wentz was like a MVP candidate, so you can't fault that. Rick says Reich was the Wentz whisperer, and he's not happy that Brian doesn't have to shovel as a shoveler. But yeah, you know, where the Colts are in the draft, they're probably not going to they won't be able to draft an impact guy right away. The options on free agency are limited, so you know, why not make this trade? I heard this conditional second could end up becoming a first, though, if the Colts make the playoffs and Wentz plays 75% of the snaps. You know, other than that year when he got hurt, Wentz. He's very durable. Other than that, the year when he was like almost the MVP and got hurt at the end of the year, and obviously missed the Super Bowl. So for the Colts, it makes sense. Can't fault them on the trade. I know the Eagles thought they were getting a bunch of first-round picks. I don't know who wins this trade. I guess the Eagles win this trade because they get Wentz's salary off the books.
Absolutely. And Brian, I'd love to hear your opinion as well.
Yeah, I think that it does work for both teams, really, in the sense for Philly. They have a lot of questions, and one of them was what they were going to do with the situation under center. So this kind of answers that at the very least. So they get a little bit of clarity and money off the books, as Nick mentioned. But I think this is a great move for the Colts. I really do. I mean, the familiarity aspect of it is part one that we're all talking about. If the conditional pick does come into play, it means good things. It means that the team either made the playoffs or that Carson Wentz is healthy. So, you know, that would be good news for the Colts. They had their offensive line is one of the best in football. They had a relatively down year for them, and they were still one of the 10 best, probably a top 10 offensive line in football. So when it comes to surrounding Carson Wentz with what he needs to succeed on offense and game plan wise with Reich, I mean, I think this is a great move. I really do. The division is kind of changing shape. Whether, you know, Deshaun Watson's there or not, we don't know. But Tennessee is going to have a new system that they're going to have to implement because their offensive coordinator is gone. And the Colts really can take a bit of a stranglehold on this division with, you know, an improvement from last year. And people could say whatever they want about Carson Wentz and some of the terrible turnovers and bad play that we saw last year. Obviously, there are some things that he probably has to clean up, but I think this is more than a worthwhile gamble for the Colts. They didn't have to give up such a crazy amount, and I actually think they're well on their way to winning that division next year.
I agree 100%. And I think one of the things that you have to give credit to the Colts for is this is an offseason to do it because you have the money where a lot of teams probably are going to be struggling to just try to create that space in their team to kind of retain most of their guys. So for the Colts, you know, having that QB in place, having that to be able to pitch to your weapons that you're trying to chase in free agency, having that system set and really able to be worked on is absolutely huge. And with the money they have, and they're already a very good team, I think they could be a enticing spot in free agency for a lot of players that are probably looking for a contending team, but also want somewhat of a payday with that.
Rick says this sort of situation is why trading away the fund for elite QB is hazardous. Don't capital the Eagles spent to trade up for Wentz. Getting return of a guaranteed third and a second is a giant loss for Philly's overall value. Yeah, if you look back over the past 10 years at QBs drafted in the first round, it's probably like it's probably close to 0 people are on their team. Obviously, the other people on their team I could think of off the top of my head are Jackson, Allen, and Mayfield. As far as like we're talking like top 10, top 15 picks, right? So it's not great. And when you move up it that much, it hurts you, especially when in a few years later you're going to end up shipping that person out of town. So it always comes down to, how much do you value these draft picks and what round is the most value, Michael?
Absolutely. And I think for the Eagles, it's good that you are now kind of looking at this trade and establishing Jalen Hurts most likely as your quarterback. A lot of people have said don't rule out a QB at 6. I get it, but I think they are going to stick with Hurts, let him have a year. I think it's important to try to get this roster back to young and talented. And while you may take a QB, if you find someone to be a franchise caliber quarterback, go ahead and swing for it if you don't trust Hurts, I guess. But if you can use this draft to add some weapons, add some future young pieces for this defense and offense in the trenches and in the secondary, then that's absolutely huge. And I think it would benefit them in the long run.
I see the Eagles doing what I guess maybe the fans will be I don't know. I see them picking Smith or Waddle there at 6. And I think this goes back to when Brian said that the coach of the Eagles he's unknown because they want him to be unknown. They want him to be a puppet. Roseman's kind of like running the show up there, and a lot of Eagles fans, despite the fact that they just won the Super Bowl not too long ago, are very unhappy with the direction of the franchise. But I see them going for like a big name offensive talent there. Even though they should probably be looking more towards defense or offensive line.
It's kind of funny because I feel like every sports fan gets asked that question of, would you accept, 10 years of bad play from your franchise if it meant getting a Super Bowl right now? And like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, absolutely. But now it's like 3 years after, and Philadelphia fans are already sick of it. They're like, we didn't like the hypothetical, we want back to normal. So we'll see what happens, but definitely an interesting situation for both Indianapolis and Philadelphia. We got a couple other interesting situations to address with the offseason blueprints continuing. We're going to start off with the Carolina Panthers, and with their draft, I had to make some edits right leading up to this show because they cut Trey Boston today. Shows how much I know because I had him in their plans already wiped out, so we changed it up. We're taking a look at their mock, though. First round, I got him getting Zach Wilson. I understand a lot of the mocks are saying, we could see 3 QBs in the first 3 picks. Maybe, but we see this every year where there's this hype that these QBs are going to go so early. And yeah, these QBs are still going early. The 8th pick as QB3 is insane. But I do think that it needs to be cooled down a little bit on expecting where these QBs will fall. Happens every year. Dwayne Haskins was never supposed to fall to Washington. Guys like Josh Allen wasn't supposed to get to 10. Guys like Patrick Mahomes wasn't supposed to get to 12. It happens all the time where these QBs will drop a little bit. So even someone like Jordan Love last year, no one was expecting him to go in the 20s. People were saying he could go as high as number 6 to Los Angeles. So Zach Wilson at 8, I think, is very feasible. I don't think Carolina needs to trade up. And I think that this is a great opportunity for whether it's Wilson or Fields at this spot. I think could be a great pick and really allow this offense that has pretty much vocally been saying that they want a new quarterback that can offer a lot as a playmaker to bring in a great playmaker like Zach Wilson.
Listen, I honestly, I really think, I'm rating Wilson too high here. If Wilson is on the Panthers, they have a legit chance to be a playoff team next year in his first year. But that means they're keeping McCaffrey. They're not shipping him out to get anybody. Michael, you and I were so high on Rule all season. We were very impressed what he did without his best player and without his second best player for a lot of the year, and Bridgewater being out. And yeah, even if I would assume in this situation they do keep Bridgewater, and he does start, but he'd be pushed real quick, I think, with Wilson. And between the two of them, either way, I think this could be a scenario you've seen it many times, a mid-season switch. But I really like the way the Panthers would be heading, especially if they take Wilson here. As we know, Ryan's heading towards the end of his career with the Falcons. Breeze is done. Brady's only going to play another 10 years. So it's a win. It's not necessarily a winnable division, but they could definitely be a playoff team, especially with 7 playoff teams.
Yeah, a lot of these teams, like you said, their window is closing. So I think it's important for the Panthers to really capitalize on that window that really opens up after maybe the Bucs next year. And I don't even think the Bucs are this untouchable team. So if the Panthers can get a rookie, whether it's Wilson, whether it's Fields, or even if it's Lance, and you have Bridgewater kind of there as the vet presence to hold down the job until they're ready, I think the Panthers have plenty of upside. And this could be an absolute home run pick, really getting that QB that they've been chasing after all offseason. With the second round pick, I have him going Elijah Vera Tucker. You look at what he can do as a guard, and he is absolutely phenomenal. 2019 played guard. He moved to tackle in 2020. He was fine. I don't think there's any issues with him as a college football tackle, but you're getting the best out of him at guard. Right now, the Panthers' interior offensive line is filled with question marks. I think they keep some of the guys. Paratus is obviously great, but, maybe someone like John Miller stays on the line. But I do think that bringing in AVT is absolutely huge to establishing this offensive line and getting some more comfort for this offense and allowing it to get some more work done. Third round, we went with Andre Cisco out of Syracuse. Trey Boston, cut today, shocked me. I had to go on the computer, change up the graphics. So Cisco, third round, I think this is still a great pick. Getting some safety help in here. Jeremy Chin is a phenomenal safety, but he mostly plays down at linebacker. So when they cut Trey Boston, it was just very out in the open that they need a safety. Looking at it, there's guys like Justin Burris, there's guys like Kenny Robinson that are on roster that could potentially get that chance at starting, but I think they should try and play the board. And if someone like Andre Cisco is available in the third, which may be a little bit lenient, then they have a great opportunity at getting a long-term starting free safety. In the fourth round, I have them going Kari Vincent Jr., slot corner. I have them addressing free agency for the cornerback position as well, but I think it's big that they get their slot in the draft. Vincent Jr. is a very talented corner. Joe Brady probably had some problems with him back in the day at LSU with all the practice squad sessions. I'm sure he had some issues trying to find a way to complete passes on him. So maybe there's a little bit of tension there, but I think, Joe Brady probably has some familiarity with him to where he'll say, hey, if we're looking for a slot corner, he's pretty good, and I think we should get him. Fourth round, great value for him. We move on to the fifth round where we look at guys like Taquan Graham, a defensive lineman out of Texas. I think add some depth to your defensive line. Derek Brown and Zach Kerr are probably going to hold down that job, and I don't think you look at these day 3 picks as starters for the most part, but having a guy like Graham that offers upside and has decent pass rush ability, I think you bring them in, and if they work their way up, that's great because that's how Rule has kind of set up his defense. It's dependent on young players being able to step up to the challenge. So if someone like Graham steps up and brings a lot of presence that maybe wasn't expected out of him immediately, then you may have a great starter in the fifth round. For the next fifth round pick, we go Tyler Vaughns out of USC. Curtis Samuel likely hits the market, and I don't think that they are going to be able to replace him with a fifth round pick. But I do think adding a guy like Vaughns to this wide receiver room is definitely a great add, and he's someone that I think is extremely underrated in this draft process. He's a slot wide receiver most likely, but I think he has the size to where he can play inside and outside. I think he's really nuanced in his routes. While USC ran a pretty simple route tree, I really like Vaughn's route running ability, and I think that he could be someone that sticks around for a long time in the NFL adding him to a Joe Brady offense where they love to go 4 or 5 wide receivers deep in the rotation, sometimes 6, would be absolutely a great get in your day 3 picks. With the 6th round pick, I'm going Grant Stewart. Getting some depth linebacker play is huge. Jermaine Carter had a strong season. Shaq Thompson is very good. We talked about Chin playing, but I think you have to add some depth, get some guys that can be high energy and able to contribute on special teams. And I think Stewart does that. You look at his size, he's a little bit undersized, 6'3", 235, but he's definitely a great run stopper. Reminds me a lot of Landon Roberts, who also came from Houston. And I think in that 6th round, getting a value like Stewart is definitely huge. And then with our 7th round pick, we got him going Marcus Murphy, a hard-hitting safety out of Mississippi State, plays that strong safety spot pretty well. And I think he can contribute both in special teams and as a depth player with upside. And this would make for a very strong Panthers draft.
How much is Kary Vincent Jr.'s draft stock impacted by him not playing last year? Does it help him because LSU is so bad, or does it hurt him because he came off a national championship and that he could have been potentially raising in the draft ranks here? Or do you think he's really just properly slotted at this point?
I think that it hurts him a little bit, but at the same time, there is something to be said about the fact that they lost guys like Vincent and the secondary fell apart. With Vincent there, things would have been a lot better. I don't think he's just automatically going to make this LSU team phenomenal, but I do think that having a presence like him opt out hurts LSU, and it showed on the tape. So a guy like Vincent in the 4th round may be a little bit generous. Maybe this whole draft has some generous moments with Andre Cisco and Kary Vincent and Elijah Vera Tucker even. But I do think that these are around similar projections of where they could go in the draft, and I think this would be a great haul for the Panthers to move forward with as they continue what is sort of a fast rebuild, in my opinion. So we're going to take a look at the offensive side of things, and I think this is the part that should get a lot of Panther fans excited. Looking at it with Zach Wilson at QB, obviously, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Bridgewater would probably start the season, but I think Zach Wilson would start the majority of the games. McCaffrey at running back, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, and Chris Conley at receiver. I think Conley is a similar type of receiver that Panthers would be able to capitalize on. I think they will go out and find a low-value receiver that can still bring in plenty of impact. I think Conley is great for that fit. I think he's a dependable wide receiver 3. Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, obviously a very talented wide receiver duo to have for any quarterback. It's especially great for a young rookie QB like Zach Wilson to have. At tight end, I have him break the bank a little bit. Let's go and get Gerald Everett. I think Everett isn't going to get the high price tag that a lot of people may – I guess it's not really breaking the bank then, sorry. But I do think that spending on a guy like Gerald Everett is huge because I think he's underrated at the tight end spot, and I think he can contribute a lot to this offense. You look at what Gerald Everett did in Los Angeles, splitting time with Tyler Higbee, and he was very fine at the tight end spot. But I think there's so much more that can be captured from Everett that I think if a team like the Panthers and an offensive coordinator like Joe Brady can bring him in, you're getting a great steal for his value. On the offensive line, Okung comes back. I think they need to sign him. They trade for him for a reason. I think Vera Tucker starts at that left guard spot, and then you go with Paratus, Miller, and Moton. Bring back Moton, pay the price that is necessary, and your offense really can get cooking right away. And I think while Zach Wilson will have his rookie struggles, this is a team that will definitely be trending even more in the right direction and have Panther fans very excited for the years to come. What are your guys' thoughts on this offense and what you think they can do this offseason to either capitalize on opportunity or maybe things you see in this that you disagree with?
You know, one thing for me, and I guess maybe this is more of a question, I love the Vera Tucker thing because he was a guard that also played a little bit of tackle for the Trojans. And if it turns out that Russell Okung isn't back, and I don't know if it's, you correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, I don't know if it's guaranteed. He's missed like 20 games in the last 2 years for various reasons. I don't know whether they're definitely going to bring him back, if maybe they want to, but if for whatever reason he's not, you could maybe try a guy like Elijah Vera Tucker if you draft him in almost any spot on that offensive line that's not center, and you already have a center. So I actually think that works out because I'm definitely of the belief that, yes, they do need a young quarterback, and they have an amazing all-world running back and great weapons on the outside, but none of them are going to have time to make any plays if the line isn't shored up. And, we don't really know what the deal is with Okung, so they have to, address that in the draft and in free agency, where they definitely do have a few $1 million, I think.
Yeah, and there's ways to restructure it. I don't think right now at the cap point that they have like a ton of spending money, especially with all the guys that they will probably look to retain. But there are restructures that can be made to where they can find some spending money and get this team really cooking with opportunity. And now we take a look on the defensive side of things, where really it was surprising how well this defense had played, because so much of it was just young, unproven guys, and it looked disastrous at the start. Huge credit to the Panthers and what they were able to accomplish in this last year. Now, with a lot of guys retained coming back, maybe the defense isn't going to just become phenomenal, but I do think that there is a lot to be gained because of the consistent play that they will have there with guys returning. So we look at the defensive line. Derek Brown and Zach Kerr at the defensive tackle spots. Brian Burns and Yetur Gross-Matos at the edge spots. Gross-Matos steps in over Stephen Weatherly in his second year and should potentially become a great strong side defensive end to help with Burns, allowing both these guys to really capitalize in their strongest abilities. And then we look at the linebacker spot. Shaq Thompson, Jermaine Carter, and I put Jeremy Chin there. Jeremy Chin, it's hard to label him as anything. On the depth chart, though, he's listed as a Sam linebacker. Obviously, he's kind of this money backer that can play safety, either safety spot. He can play corner if you need him. He can drop down to linebacker. He's phenomenal. You can put him anywhere in this depth chart, and it's fine. Jermaine Carter really stepped up to the task. I think he's going to be in for a nice year. And then at the cornerback position, I think that's where the big question still exists. Dante Jackson is fast, and he had a little bit better of a season than what we had seen before, but there's still issues on that outside cornerback spot. I had them go and sign Garyon Conley, who I think is somewhat dependable, solid, decent starter. I don't think he's the long-term answer, but we saw a lot of similar acquisitions last offseason with guys like Eli Apple, where they just tried out some mid-level starters. And I think Garyon Conley is someone that's a little bit underrated in that regard. So I had the Panthers go out and get him for what should be a solid value. And I think you're getting a starter that can, at the very least, be a third outside corner for the long term after this season. And then Vincent at this slot spot, obviously. And then we're looking at Cisco at free safety while Justin Burris holds down the strong safety spot. Again, if you want to put Chin there, move a different linebacker into that starting lineup, that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to say you're wrong. But this Panthers team offers a lot to be excited about. This defense, though, has a lot of unknowns about it in terms of name value, but there's still a lot to love because of what Rhule has done in year one and what can be expected for year two. So looking at this with the offseason that we have mocked for them, with the potential of growth from the team having another year under Rhule, what do we see for the Panthers, and what do you think the expectation should be for fans to be satisfied?
I think maybe some fans are okay with 8-8, but I think for the most part they got to be 9-7 coming off last year, especially if they're gonna draft Wilson. I think the expectations are going to be really high to move forward into the playoffs here. And they weren't too bad last year, and that was without McCaffrey for other than 2 games. So you got to figure a full season of McCaffrey, it's going to lead to at least one or 2 extra wins.
Brian, how about you?
It's tough. I mean, anytime you end up with a rookie quarterback, because I think that we get these guys and we want them all to be to have that instant success, to really the Russell Wilson mold, where it's like come into camp, win the job, and then we're kind of off and running. And we've seen it in the years since. Also, I think some of those guys are the exception and not necessarily the rule. It doesn't mean that quarterback isn't going to be any good. It just means that it takes a bit of time. But this coaching staff has more than proven itself, especially with young players. So looking at their schedule, they're playing against the AFC East and the NFC East out of conference. I think that definitely helps them, but they do still play in a really tough division. It's hard to say what the Saints are going to look like exactly, but you pretty much know what you're going to get from a Tampa team that looks like it's going to be mostly the same. And the Falcons, you really don't know what to expect either. So it's hard to prognosticate now, but I definitely think they go 5-11 last year. They can definitely be a team that is 500 and battling sort of for that, battling for that wild card spot. I think fans take that.
The Bears obviously made the playoffs in 2020 with the 8-8 record. And Rick says, depending on how New Orleans pivots without Breeze, this sort of draft, you could see the Panthers sneaking into the playoffs with a 9-7 second place finish. I think we could all agree we're probably going to make the Bucs the favorites to win the division in the NFC South next year without Breeze.
Absolutely. And I think 8-8 is kind of that expectation of really a good season for the Panthers. Obviously, I think the Saints are still going to be just as much contenders. I think the Buccaneers are still very much in the mix. I think the Panthers will have their growing pains. There's going to be some guys that maybe fall off after 1 year in terms of exciting play. I think there's going to be some growing pains for Zach Wilson. But I do think that this team has a lot of potential that could be exciting for teams and fans to really look into. I think with Joe Brady with another season, that's going to be huge for Zach Wilson in his first year. But there still will be some issues that will need to be worked on. And so I think 8-8, 7-9 is probably the range I would go for this team. But I think as long as we continue to see this team competitive in a lot of games, Zach Wilson showing a lot of promise in his performances, then we can have a lot to be excited about for the future for the Panthers. And now we move on to the other side of the Mississippi. We're looking at the Denver Broncos and what they will do this offseason. Real quick, I just want to state, looking at what the Broncos have this offseason was absolutely insane because you cut Von Miller and you save a bunch of money. If you cut Kareem Jackson, you restructure a few deals. This team is very much in play for some big free agents this offseason. They could have about $80 million pretty easily. Obviously you got to go sign guys, maybe like Justin Simmons. Maybe sign a guy like Phillip Lindsay. Maybe sign A.J. Johnson. But this team will still have plenty of money to go out and make some big plays in free agency. I think with what you have in place, you want to see if Locke can be the guy. But this team, expect them to be big players in this free agency cycle and expect them to have some splash moves. Let's first take a look.
I think ownership, they knew they could have some money, but they didn't trust Elway. That's why Elway got his promotion, and now he's not going to be in charge of things because they were afraid what he might do.
Absolutely. Let's take a look, though, at the draft. In the first round, I have him going Patrick Surtain Jr. The legendary Patrick Surtain had a phenomenal career at corner, so getting his son, you're still getting a stud corner. I don't want to just say, he's so-and-so's son, so he's good. But this guy on film is a patient, very strong player that can play great in cover three. I think he's a great tackler, which fits the Fangio requirement. I think he will be a star corner. Looking at what this team lacked last season, and the issue was their cornerback play. Most of all, the defense needs some help on the outside. I think this is how you get that. In that second round, we have him going Cam McGrone, linebacker out of Michigan. I think they re-sign A.J. Johnson. I think they bring back Josie Jewell as the starter. But I think McGrone offers coverage versatility. I think he offers athleticism. And I think that'd be huge for the inside of this defense. We saw what Fangio was able to work with in Chicago with guys like Roquan Smith. And I think he's going to want that athleticism. McGrone flies around the field. I think he has some similar traits to Quan Alexander, a linebacker that's found plenty of success in the NFL. So bringing him into Denver and being able to get a young, talented linebacker that could potentially be your starter next to Johnson would be absolutely huge. For that third round pick, we have him going Talanoa Hufanga. If you watch the Pac-12 championship, you know who Hufanga is because he was making plays all game. Absolutely a dominant player, a hard hitter, almost like a linebacker with his build. He's a dense player that is going to lay down some great hits, but he's smart. He's very well talented in coverage. Maybe doesn't offer the athletic upside of some of the other safeties in this draft, but I think he's still a very smart, talented, hard-hitting player, and teams are going to love him. And I think he'd be an excellent fit in Denver. In the 4th round, I have him going Dante Smith, offensive tackle out of East Carolina University, getting some help on the outside and bringing in a guy that can both play guard or tackle, has potential to be a very great tackle on the outside and maybe start for you. I think Dante Smith in that 4th round, you're kind of swinging for the fences, seeing what you can do, because I think, like I said, with the Broncos, they have so much money that I'm almost struggling to find needs with this team outside of, the quarterback position, stuff like that I don't think they addressed this offseason. So with that, I go and take high upside players that I think could add to this team, or depth players that I think add to the rotation. So with that 5th round pick, I have him going Malcolm Kuntz. Obviously, Von Miller's out. You still have starters in Malik Reed and Bradley Chubb that are going to contribute, but adding Kuntz as a rotational edge rusher with plenty of upside, and I think he has plenty of talent that he could potentially surprise, especially working with a defensive system like Denver's and a coach like Fangio. You're getting a guy in the 5th round that has had plenty of hype, plenty of production, and has plenty of ability to shine if you give him the chance. In the 6th round, we go with Mustafa Johnson, defensive lineman, local product. So I'm sure a lot of Broncos fans that are also Buffalo fans will love this pick. Mustafa Johnson had a lot of hype, kind of fell off a little bit in terms of that, but I think there's still plenty to like in terms of his pass rush ability. I think the Broncos are going to let guys like Shelby Harris hit the market because of what they were able to do with these, 7th and 8th rotation defensive linemen last year. So getting a guy like Mustafa Johnson to add to that rotation is huge. And then in the 7th round, getting guys that can add as special teams players or depth players, I think is definitely great. I got him going Cade Johnson out of South Dakota State, Dylan Soner out of Iowa State, who I think is a great run blocking tight end, and then Elijah Mitchell to add to that running back room as a solid 3rd or 4th piece, depending on what they do with Royce Freeman. In a draft like this, I think a lot of people are kind of on the fence on what the Broncos do with Drew Lock. And personally, I don't think I would go with Drew Lock, but I do think that the Broncos are going to stick with him. They've kind of shown that they view him as a mid-level starter. So I think with their team in place, getting Cortland Sutton back healthy, getting this whole team another year of experience with guys like Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, and getting the offensive line healthy and back could be huge. And, maybe Drew Lock isn't going to be a superstar quarterback, but he's shown in plenty of games that he has some promise and some ability to where he could be a starting QB of a successful team if the team around him is good enough. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts both on this draft and just what you think the Broncos should do at quarterback.
I really like the 2nd round pick you have here for them. I think McGrone could probably, if there's a combine and everything, he could have maybe been an early 2nd or maybe a late 1st. But like what I saw out of him, really was the captain of the defense there. Drew Lock, I think, is the guy for now. I think they should continue with him. I don't know if necessarily drafting Trey Lance here makes them that much better next year or the year after. So I think you got to just kind of go with Lock here, keep him with Fangio, and then see what happens after this year. Because if you're the new GM, you're in here now, you're going to want to get your people in there. So I think Fangio's on the hot seat. So it's always best to kind of start things fresh. New coach with a new quarterback, unless you have an established veteran there. You don't want to draft the young guy if you're not sure on the quarterback. I mean, if you're not sure on the coach, and then have a switch after the first year. It never really pays out well for them. But again, if there's somebody here they actually love and they think, wow, this is a slam dunk guy, like the Giants love Daniel Jones for some reason when they drafted him early, then you got to make that pick. But can end up costing you your job.
Absolutely. And Brian, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think that, anyone who watched football knows that Drew Lock, regressed a little bit and was across the board, maybe one of the most disappointing starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And as was their offense, that really started the second Cortland Sutton got hurt in like week 2. Because of the position that they're in, I think that they'd love to upgrade from Drew Lock, but I don't think they can in the spot that they're in. So that's why what I love about your mock here, Michael, is that whether you did this on purpose or not, 5 out of those top 6 picks are defensive players, and that's really where they have to focus because that's how they're going to stay in games. Drew Lock is going to be their quarterback. They just need guys like Cortland Sutton to get healthy and other young guys on their offense to get better. They have to. It has to be done with defense. So I mean, in free agency, it's very easy. You just re-sign Justin Simmons after he played like a beast on the franchise tag. And, that defensive line is one of the best in football if everybody's healthy. So that's the way you're going to stay in games. I would continue drafting towards, that area. So drafting a cornerback and then re-signing Simmons pretty much solidifies their defensive backfield. You hope to get a little bit of progress out of Lock in the offense, and you kind of try to win games the ugly way. And I think that that's what they're setting up for.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think drafting defense is playing to Fangio. And I think obviously if they had a QB that they view as a franchise quarterback, like Nick said, it's maybe something that you have to consider. But with most likely, I assume they aren't going to go QB. So getting that defense filled with young talent in what is already a strong defense, I think this offense has a lot of support. I think the Broncos really have a lot of potential this offseason to make some big splash plays. And with this draft, I think they do that right away. Let's look, though, at the offense. First and foremost, a lot of it is guys wearing Bronco uniforms. Drew Lock, Melvin Gordon, and Phillip Lindsay in the backfield. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler in the receiving unit. Noah Fant back at tight end, who I love. Looking at the offensive line, Garrett Bowles has turned himself into one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL. Guys like Reisner, Cushenberry III, Graham Glasgow. There's not a lot to say about this offense besides trying to bring back a lot of the guys that performed well. But then we have their first splash play of the offseason, sign Darrell Williams at right tackle. They have Juwan James right now under contract. If they start him after he opted out this season, that's a possibility, and I think it could be okay. But I think with this offense, the biggest thing is health, and having Cortland Sutton miss the season, having Juwan James out hurt this offense. So bring in a guy like Darrell Williams, who I think had a phenomenal year at right tackle for Buffalo. You can have him established as your right tackle, and you have one of the best offensive lines in football just with that signing alone. And with guys like Phillip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon, the run game is going to be going. And then if you have Drew Lock comfortable in that pocket with great weapons like Jeudy, like Sutton, like Hamler to take the top off, with other depth guys like Tim Patrick, who likely returns, there's still a lot of upside in this offense, even if you don't view Lock as a superstar QB. And then we look at the defensive side of things for Denver. Jarrell Casey, I think he restructured his contract. Mike Purcell, nose tackle. Draymond Jones at defensive end as well. This is a very strong defensive line. We talked about it. Shelby Harris. I think if you're the Broncos, you let him walk. I love Harris. I think he had a great year. But looking at what Fangio was able to do with all these defensive linemen, it didn't matter who was in. They were still getting pressure every single game. And I think that speaks to what Fangio is able to do with his defenses, what the defense coordinator is able to do. So I don't think you need to spend big at the position at all. I'm not saying completely abandon it, but with guys like Casey and Draymond Jones at the defensive end spots, with guys like Purcell at nose tackle, you aren't dying if Shelby Harris hits the market and goes and gets paid like he probably deserves as well. At the edge spot, we got Bradley Chubb and Malik Reed. Obviously, Von Miller gone. That's going to hurt in some regard, but having Chubb, Reed, and Malcolm Kuntz as an edge rusher as a rotational piece, the Broncos are still going to be generating pressure. Yes, they may be hurting a little bit, but I think they will still be very strong at the position. At inside linebacker, we got Alexander Johnson returned. Josie Jewell probably holds down the starting spot, but I think Cam McGrone will get plenty of snaps, rotate in a lot, and eventually become the long-term starter. And then we look at the cornerback unit. We already talked about Patrick. We already talked about how much the Broncos have money this offseason to make plays. And I think how they make that play is Chidobe Awuzie. What we see out of this guy as a prospect is versatility, great tackling ability, and great coverage ability. He offers great speed. He has a very nice frame. He struggled, though, with Cowboys. I don't think that is entirely on him. And I think the Broncos being able to bring him in at probably, $9 million a year, which isn't even like a bad, huge deal. It's very nice value, I think. You're bringing in a solid starter on the outside, and you're establishing the secondary for the future. So having PS2, I like to call him, Chidobe Awuzie and Bryce Callahan at the cornerback unit transforms this unit from a weakness to a very strong group for the team. And then at the safety spots, Justin Simmons comes back on what will probably be a very big deal where the Broncos will have to open their pockets for him. And then you bring in Will Parks, who was your starter last year. Well, not last year, 2 years ago, went to Philadelphia, got cut. He's back, and I think with Kareem Jackson gone, you have Parks and you have Hufanga, both of which can start and be very solid for this team. The Broncos have the ability to make some plays this offseason, and I think they're a team to keep an eye on. And, with this blueprint, I think they are very much in contention with the Raiders, with the Chargers, to be that second team in the AFC West, and I think they can make playoffs with that as well.
I don't see them being a playoff team. I know people were saying last year, they're going to be a playoff team. I think there's just too many, scenarios of if this works out, if this guy does this, if this guy does that, then this could happen. But I guess the same could be said about probably half the teams in the NFL. If everything breaks the right way, they all think they can get in the playoffs. To me, it's just going to be tough here. But I think, like you mentioned earlier, the offense is pretty solid. So we'll just have to see if your additions here at quarterback make the difference that the Broncos need. You got to remember, they're in a very tough division. The Chargers are going to probably be a playoff team. The Chiefs are a playoff team. The Raiders are right there on the verge of being a playoff team. So it's just going to be very tough, in my opinion, for the Broncos to crack the playoffs next year.
It'll definitely be tough, but I do think looking at this team, it's hard to spot out as many weaknesses as you'd expect from a team picking in the top 10. Obviously, we've added some guys through the draft and through free agency, but I think a lot of it was due to injuries, and I think this roster has very much more talent than their draft position right now. Brian, I'd love to get your thoughts on this team and what you think the outlook is for them going forward.
Well, I've got a question for you guys. Are the playoffs going to be expanded next year also?
I believe so, yeah.
It's seven. It's permanent.
Or no, yeah, it's still 7. Sorry.
It's not going to be 8. It'll be 7. It'll be 7 teams forever for at least who knows.
The season's expanding. It's 17 games, but it's still 7 teams in playoffs.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is going to be tough. If you have any belief in the Broncos at all, you guys know I'm a betting guy. You should just bet on the Broncos odds to either make the playoffs, which aren't available yet, or to win the AFC West because they're absolutely astronomical, even though that's not going to happen. The Chiefs are going to cakewalk. But, whether or not they make the playoffs is really dependent on how you see other teams in the AFC performing, I think, because you really just have to count to 7 and then figure out whether or not they can kind of fit in that. I think that the Broncos have the ability to, they might have been a year early with some of the expectations that they had. I know that injuries kind of derailed them early on. I don't think you can really undervalue how much of a role losing Courtland Sutton so early, how much that hurt the offense and Drew Lock. So I do think that their offense will be a little bit better than it was last year, but other teams in their division like the Chargers and the Raiders are going to improve also. And we know what the Chiefs already are. And there are 2 teams in the AFC East that are good. There are 2 teams in the AFC South that are good. And let's look in the AFC North. There's 2 or 3 teams that'll be competing for a playoff spot also. So I don't think that they get into the playoffs. I think that they'll maybe surpass expectations a little bit, get back to around getting back to 500. And putting themselves in a position where they're even going to have more cap space when it goes up the following year, and they could possibly get a new quarterback. The next season is probably when I'd look for the Broncos to really make noise.
Absolutely. And it really comes down to Drew Lock. If he can play well or even just at a solid level, I think this team, though, can be very good. I love Fangio, and I think he's one of the best coaches, defensive minds in football. I think he has the ability to make a great unit, especially if they invest in the defense as much as I had them doing this mock off season. So if Drew Lock can both stay healthy, play well, and the rest of the team can stay somewhat healthy as well, I think the Broncos are a team that could surprise and maybe exceed expectations. But it really does fall down on Drew Lock. So if he struggles again, then I do not expect him to be back as the Broncos quarterback in that following year.
How about the Broncos taking a look at Sam Darnold? Maybe not. It's too many ifs there. But I wanted to discuss what the Wentz trade means for the market for Sam Darnold. Michael, you and I discussed this off air, but you kind of feel like they'll get more for Darnold, the Jets, than the Eagles got for Wentz because Darnold doesn't have that contract. But to Brian's point,
I wasn't saying that at all. I was just saying I think he's still going to get I don't think it has as much impact because it's still very much a different situation due to contract. But I don't think the Jets are going to get more than the Eagles got for Wentz at all.
Well, the thing with Darnold is, though, if you trade for him, then you're probably thinking you're going to pick up the option on him. So that's a lot of money there. And then you're into the franchise tagging zone, and that's going to be a ton of money. So to me, these are very similar situations, but I think Wentz is a little more talented. I don't know. I personally don't see you getting anything more than a third-round pick for Darnold. But who am I to know at this point? I just feel like there's nobody dying for Darnold, and it would more so the team trading for him has the advantage, I feel like, because they would know, okay, the Jets, they want to move on from him. They need to free the space to draft somebody or trade for somebody, especially if it's the scenario where they get Watson, the dream scenario for Jets fans. Then it's like, okay, the Jets, they have Darnold. They're either going to cut him or like we can get him for like a 5th-round pick because there's no way that if you have Watson, Darnold's going to be the backup. I just don't see that happening, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's anybody's guess. Who am I to say? Just like you said, Adam Schefter did say, based on the return of the Stafford deal, that he thought Darnold could bring back a late 1st-round pick. I guess that's on which team you're dealing with, of course. I mean, I know that there's a lot of rumors going around, some opinions that he will wind up on the Bears, which isn't even that much of an upgrade for them, even though I do think Darnold's better than Mitch. But, I don't know. I think that when the money has so much to do with it and Wentz had a contract in place that paid him a certain amount, that kind of like the Goff thing that we discussed, where you're paying a team to sort of take on his money also, that gets factored into the return. So I think we like to see one deal and think it's going to be apples to apples, but it's actually apples to oranges a little bit because, Darnold has an option for the 5th year, but that has to get picked up any day now.
Right.
Else he's guaranteed to be a free agent after the following season. And if he's going to be a free agent, that's going to drastically probably reduce the amount that you can get for him, right? Yep. So I don't compared to Wentz, I don't know how much it'll be, but I don't think the Jets trade him, they're going to get all that much right now. And I do agree with Nick that the team trading for a guy like Darnold would have all the advantage in that spot. They could kind of just let him play the 4th year. If he plays well, we'll look at an extension and we'll figure it out. But the Jets are going to be the team that need to get something for him, or they're going to get nothing. But I still say trade the number 2 pick for a haul and let Darnold play next year as of now.
Well, I definitely think that we're going to see a 2nd-round pick trade for Darnold. I think there's enough to where both sides would be enticed by that if they do go forward with trading Darnold. But ultimately, I think the trade market value, like Brian said, is just going to be very sporadic in terms of what each QB is seen as, and it doesn't have a lot of correlation at times. So I think we'll see a second for Darnold. I think whether it's early, late, mid, whatever, I'm not sure. It'll probably just come down to what that team is trying to offer. I could see a team like the Bears making a move. I could see a team like New Orleans maybe making a move if Winston's market gets too big. But ultimately, it's just a lot of wait and see. Some other notable headlines. We talked about Trey Boston getting cut, but also Deshaun Jackson has been cut by the Eagles. Christian Kirksey and Rick Wagner have been cut by the Packers. So there are some big cuts coming out today and probably throughout this weekend and next few weeks. So keep an eye on that and try to keep tabs on it because a lot of teams are trying to create money for this offseason that could be a bit strapped for cash. Next Monday, we got the Cowboys and Giants rebuild projects, mock off seasons. Nick, very excited to make the Giants Super Bowl contenders in one episode, and we will do that, obviously, because who's better than us? Destination Draft Day, whether it's pro football, college football, or NFL draft coverage, we got you covered. Thank you so much to LandryFootball.com. Thank you so much to Bonus Seekers and everyone in the comment section. And thank you to Brian and Nick for being great co-hosts. It's a long road to the NFL draft, but we got you covered here at Destination Draft Day. We'll see you Monday. Take care.